Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia Online. I'm Laura Kovacs, and I'm honored to be here. Sadeqa Johnson is the award winning author of novels that touch upon themes of fidelity, friendship, and finding real connection in modern life. Her numerous honors include the National Book Club Award and the Phillis Wheatley Award. Her new novel, Yellow Wife, tells the harrowing story of an enslaved woman forced to barter love and freedom while living in the most infamous slave jail in Richmond. An NPR review calls the book a beautifully told, thought provoking page turner. This evening, she will be joined in conversation with Jennifer Weiner, #1 New York Times bestselling author and beloved social media fixture. And now the screen is all yours.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Sadeqa. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome virtually back to Philadelphia.
I feel like I'm there,
Don't you?
Yeah, I feel like I'm
Smell the cheesesteaks?
there. And taste the soft pretzel with mustard.
Absolutely. So I wanted to start off by talking about your Philadelphia background. I'm not sure everybody knows your whole story. So give us the whole, talk to me about Philadelphia and how Philadelphia made you a writer.
Oh, wow. Well, I grew up. I was born in South Philly. We moved to Logan when I was in first grade. I went to Holy Child parochial school, and then I went to George Washington Carver High School of Engineering and Science. The crazy thing about me being a student at ENS was that I was like the only geeky theater person. Everybody else was like really science serious. And so
how did you end up there? I gotta ask, like, how did you end up in an engineering and science high school? What happened?
Well, my dad made me go because he thought that being at a school where, the classes were taught rapidly, is what they called it back then, was more important than me just kind of like bouncing around in the theater. So I went to Freedom Theater after school. So I went to engineering and science for my education, and then I went to Freedom Theater after school for acting. So I graduated from there, and then I went off to New York, and I was a student at Marymount Manhattan College. And that's really kind of where the writing started, because I was a theater major. So I started with playwriting and poetry and screenplay writing. And from there, I got into novel writing. But growing up in Philly, I would say the biggest influence for me was the library. I mean, the fact that we're here talking on the Philadelphia Library is like near and dear to my heart. I spent countless hours at the Logan branch. Between the Logan branch and the Alany branch, those were my two libraries. And I would check out books. I read a book a day, and that was kind of the beginning of me being a writer. I was a big reader first.
That's what I tell everyone is before you're a writer, you're always a reader. And I, like you, grew up in my small town's library, and I can still smell it. It had that like very specific, like old paper smell. And, every time I get a hit of that, it just takes me right back. So what kind of books did you read as a kid?
I read, so when I was in, the books that got me in trouble were the Sweet Valley High books. I will
Oh,
say
yeah.
that, because those twins, I could not get enough of their high school drama. I read a lot of Judy Blume, Joanna Hurwitz when I was little. When I got a little bit older, I was introduced to Maya Angelou and Terry McMillan. When I read Mama by Terry McMillan, it was like she was speaking directly to me. That was a book that I think kind of transformed me. And that's when I started to kind of get a little bit more into books written by African American women who were telling stories that I could really relate to. I would say that was probably 10th, 11th grade for me.
Right. I mean, I can still remember reading Mama. And for those of you who haven't read it, it's Terry McMillan's debut. It's very, semi-autobiographical, I think she would call it. And it's the story of her mother sort of living in Detroit, having 5 kids. There's drama with men, there's drama with money, they're moving all the time. And it's just an amazing story. And it's a story of a girl becoming a writer too, which I think, makes it resonate so deeply with so many of us.
It's that coming of age part that got me. It really, when she moved, Frida was the main character
Yeah.
of Mama. And when Frida moved out to Los Angeles by herself and got her own apartment and lit up that first cigarette, I was like, oh, I was like right there with her.
It's an amazing, amazing book. Highly recommend it. Which leads me to my next question. A lot of people want to know, at least when I'm doing events, they want to know, like, how did you get that first book published? How did you write it? How did you find an agent? How did you find a publisher? And in your case, I know you self-published your first book. So take us and let me back up a little, because you were an acting student in college. So like, walk me through, how do we get from acting to writing to being a published author?
So acting for me was like my love. It was everything that I wanted to do. In fact, when I left Philadelphia and I moved to New York, I was convinced that I was not even going to graduate from college. I was convinced that I was going to New York. I was going to get my big break. I would be in college for 2 or 3 weeks. And next thing you know, I would be on the Cosby Show. But that did not happen.
Did you audition?
No.
Did you take that step? No.
I didn't even get the audition for the Cosby Show, but I did audition for other things. I was watching Law and Order with my daughter the other day, and I told her, I've auditioned for Law and Order, and impressing kids is really difficult. So she was kind of impressed when I told her that. So I did audition a bit. When I graduated from college, I was really just looking for a job of doing something that I love, which was, reading I love. So I got a job in publishing. And it was there that I started kind of fooling around with writing. But my thought was, I worked in publishing so that I could pay the bills, but I would go to auditions on my lunch break, and I would try and go to auditions after work. That was kind of how I was straddling both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved from Scholastic Books was my first job, children's publishing. And then I went over to G.P. Putnam's Son, which was my second job. And that's when I was working with the heavy hitters, the Catherine Coulter, Nevada Barr, Rebecca Walker, B.B. Moore Campbell, who is a local Philadelphia. She was from Philadelphia as well. That's when I started to work on those type of books. And I just was writing all the time. And so at that point, I lived in New Jersey, so I had to take the train into the city. So I would write every day on the train. I would get to work. I would close my office every day at 4:00. I would type in all of my edits. Print. And this was back when you had to share a printer, right? So you didn't have your own printer in your office. So I would print like 15, 20 pages and have to like zoom out to the machine so I could grab my novel before anybody knew what I was doing.
I have been there. I have done that. I have stood by a fax machine, like waiting to see the cover of a novel. It's, oh my God, it's not easy being old. But those, it's true. It's like, I remember I wrote my first novel on a Mac Classic, which had no internet connection. And like, I worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I was like printing out pages there and like hovering over the printer, making sure nobody saw. So tell us about that first book.
Yeah, so that was the first book. I was writing it on the train. I would make the corrections on the way home. And then when I finished it, I got an agent. I quit my job because I had my first child at that point. And so I thought, okay, so I'm going to be a best-selling author. I'm going to raise my son, and everything's going to work out. Well, that's not how things happen. My agent took my book to market, and 10 different editors, one by one, they just all flat turned me down. So I was devastated.
What was, give us the title. What was this book about?
So the first novel is called Love in a Carry-On Bag, and it's a long-distance love story. She lives in New York. He lives in D.C. They really want to be together, but there's all these things pulling them apart. And it was kind of based on the fact that my husband and I, when we met, we were long distance. Right. So I lived in New York, he lived in Philly, and we saw each other every weekend. But in the story, I had to stretch it out a little bit. Of course, you start with an idea, but then the fiction takes over, right? That's the beauty of writing fiction, is that it's never all about you. It's just parts of you. So when the book was finished, I thought it was great. We thought it was ready to go. And apparently the industry just was not ready for me, Jen. That's the best way I can describe it.
But you didn't give up. We're all very lucky you didn't give up. So what happened next?
So I went to dinner with my husband, and I was pretty heartbroken. And we had some pomegranate margaritas, and I was crying into my drink. And he said, well, what's the big deal? Everybody said no. What do we need to do this ourselves? And I said, well, I need an editor. And he said, well, let's just hire an editor.
Mhm.
And it was like a light bulb or something went off. That thought never really occurred to me. And right there in that restaurant, we started making the list of what we needed to do to put the book out ourselves. So I hired an editor. I got a publicist on board. I was my own salesperson. So I was literally calling up bookstores using a fake name, pretending that I was someone else to
John
try.
Barron.
Exactly. Trying to get them. I think I used Dee Dee Murray because Murray is my maiden name and my friends call me Dee. So I was like, hi, this is Dee Dee Murray. Would you be interested in, loving a carry-on bag? And so, we did it all. And we went to every book festival that we could find on the East Coast. I was literally at the Harlem Book Festival in 98 degrees, standing outside, selling my book. And so
Amazing.
it was definitely from the ground up. I did everything that I could, and it worked, because then I won the Phillis Wheatley Award for Loving a Carry-On Bag, which then propelled me to get a 2-book deal for Second House from the Corner, and then there was me. And that was kind of, I had to pay those dues. I don't know why I had to pay them, but I had to pay those dues.
Though, I think everyone who looks like an overnight success from the outside, a lot of people have those, rejection stories where like agents don't want it, or editors don't want it, or an agent wants it and an editor wants it and the readers don't want it, which I have to imagine is like the worst, the worst situation of all. But Love and a Carry-On Bag, that it turned out to be a hit, and like you said, you got yourself a 2-book deal. So talk to me about those 2 books. So you still have one child at this point? Like, where are you? Are you living in Jersey? Are you in New York City? What's going on?
Yeah, so I was living in Jersey. When Love in a Carry-On Bag came out, I think we had all 3 children at that point, because my youngest was born in 2008. Love in a Carry-On Bag came out in 2012. So I was literally home having children, writing and taking care of them, and still trying to stay with what I wanted to do for myself. And my
For
writing,
people who are listening, do not try this at home, okay? Because like this, I'm listening to this and I'm astonished. Like, I mean, I think so many women, and tell me if this rings true, like you have this fantasy of like, oh yes, I'll have a baby, and then while the baby is napping, I will, I'll rock that cradle with my foot while I'm like typing my brilliant novel. And you don't factor in that you're going to be so damn exhausted that, so you have 3 kids while you're doing all of this. This is amazing to
and
me.
what my trick was that I found a teenage babysitter, and I made my writing time very specific. And so nap time was kind of out because I was exhausted or I needed a nap. And
Yep.
so my writing time every day was 4 to 6 p.m. So she was a teenage sitter. She would come over my house when she got out of school. They played in the living room. My office was in the basement. I wrote for those 2 hours, and then I came up and I gave them dinner, and I was a happy mom because I was able to get a little bit done, and it really is just a little bit of writing each day gets you to the finish line.
Yes. And I think having a place to go with a door that shuts is like critical. When my kids were little, I wrote in my closet, which everybody laughs at, but like there's a vanity in there where like a fancy lady would do her makeup. And I put my laptop there and I shut the closet door. And after I've already shut my bedroom door. So like if those kids wanted me, they really had to work to get to me. And I think that there's, I think women feel guilty for all kinds of reasons, but the idea that like you are taking time to do something that you love is, I think, a really healthy thing to show them. And I think that it's amazing that your kids got to see this all happen and are now old enough to understand and appreciate it to the extent that any of our kids appreciate us, which I don't know. All right, so talk to me about book number 2.
Yeah. So Second House from the Corner is about a woman who gets married with secrets and what happens when they come out of her closet. And I was writing that book at a time when I did have these 3 small kids. And I remember being on the playground, I was sleep deprived, and I was listening to all these mothers talk about how great motherhood was, and, how just everything was just glam, glam, glam. And I was sitting there thinking like, yeah, but can we talk about the non-glamorous part? Could we be honest for a minute? And I didn't feel like I was in circles where we could really say, yo, sometimes this really sucks, you know? I
Mhm.
couldn't give them my inside voice. And so that was what Felicia got, you know? Felicia got my inside voice, that voice that you couldn't really say out loud. And
Mhm.
so that was kind of the beginning of that story, mixed in with stories that my grandmother had told me about growing up in Philadelphia that I just thought was so good and juicy, parts of things that happen in my family, and just the premise of this marriage with these small kids and trying to make it work.
Yes.
And that was Second House from the Corner. When I sold Second House from the Corner to St. Martin's Press, I had a small idea of And Then There Was Me, but it was not worked out at all. I literally pitched it to the editor when we were having a meeting, and she bought both books. So that was kind of scary when
Amazing.
to have to write a book after I was already kind of like in it, you know. But I did. I got it done, and that story, And Then There Was Me, is a story about a woman who another marriage, but she has an eating disorder. She has bulimia, and she's in this marriage where she doesn't feel like she has any control, and she's completely losing herself. It's a story about friendship, secrets, lies, and it was a fun story for me to write.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So both of those books, like super contemporary, super timely, very much of the moment. And then we have this turn to historical fiction, which I did not see coming. So here we are with Yellow Wife. How did this story come to you? How did this all happen?
Jen, I didn't see Yellow Wife coming. I had no idea that historical fiction was in my future. But our higher power, he knows. He knows so much so that we were living in New Jersey, and I remember we were looking for a new house. We were looking for a place to move, and I remember standing in my kitchen, and I heard this voice that said, "You should move." And it felt like move, like not down the street, not around the corner, like move. And so that's how I ended up moving outside of Richmond. We literally looked at the map and just kind of went down the map, and we found a house, and we loved it down here. And we were here for about 6 months. We had some friends come down from New Jersey to visit us, and we were looking for an activity to do with our kids and their kids, a family activity. We hadn't been here long. We didn't know much about the Richmond history. And so we were like, why don't we go on the Richmond Slave Trail? So we pack up all the kids. It's down on the James River. It was a beautiful April day. We're out there getting fresh air. We're walking along the river. And as you walk along the river, there's markers along the way to just talk about the way that the slaves were brought into Richmond on the James River. And it talks about different parts of the history. And I remember when we got to the marker that talked about the Lumpkins jail, and it said that the Lumpkins jail was a notorious punishing center for slaves. And the owner, his name was Robert Lumpkin, and they called him the bully trader. He was really mean, and he was just deceptive and treacherous. And he was married to a Black woman, and her name was Mary Lumpkin. And it said that they had 5 children together. And they lived on this half acre of land where the most horrendous things that you can imagine were happening. But at the same time, it said Robert loved Mary and the family that they created together. And the contradiction for me, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. The biggest thing that I was thinking about was Mary, because I am a mother, I have children. And I kept wondering, like, what was it like for her living on a half acre with these children and this man? How do you raise your children? How does it feel to her as an enslaved person to see what's happening to her fellow enslaved people? Her children are there. What's her relationship with him? Is it survival? Does she grow to love him? So these are all of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm walking on the trail. So we ended up, it's a pretty long trail for kids to do all 17 markers. So we ended up jumping in the car and skipping ahead because now my curiosity is piqued. And at the end of the trail is the site of the Lumpkins jail. So the jail's not there anymore, but it's just the site. And next to the site of the jail, there's the African burial ground, because all those who died at the jail were just, there was no ceremony. It was just, they were thrown in the ground, dirt, nothing big, just they waited till the bodies piled up and then they just shoved them in the ground. And so that area is still a sacred place in Richmond. And just walking along, walking around that area, it was like I could feel this energy. And I know this sounds crazy, but it was almost like they were waiting for me to come. It was like the ancestors were waiting because they wanted their story told. And it wasn't just me who felt the energy. Like the kids, they, the big open field where the African burial ground were, the children started to kind of move their bodies and they started to dance. And my friend started to pretend like he was playing the African drums and the congos. And we were just out there just having sort of like a celebratory moment. But something was happening to me, I could feel it. And so when we got in the car and we went back home, and for the next few days, I'm literally online just Googling, trying to find as much information as I can about this, not committed to write a book because I am not a historical fiction writer at this point. And I don't even think it's something that I could do at this point. I don't have the courage yet. It feels still kind of like I'm interested. I love reading historical fiction. I remember growing up, I read Jubilee by Margaret Walker. I read Winch. I read The Kitchen House, and I had just finished, there's another Philadelphia writer that I love, Diane McKinney Whetstone. I had just finished reading Lazaretto, probably maybe 2 or 3 months prior, and I was completely blown away by that book. And I'll say that book gave me just a little bit of courage that I could possibly do it, that I could possibly write historical fiction. But I was afraid of it. I was really, really afraid of it.
Yes, I having dipped my toe into that water, I understand the fear, because when you're dealing, in contemporary fiction, it's like all your imagination. But if you're writing about like real events or stories based on real events, like there's an actual history there. And I think especially in this case, like there's a history you need to be, you need to honor it. Like you can't go in and sort of just make up your own stuff and have your way with it. And one of the things I was so struck by with this book was the details. The way that it smells, the clothes that they wear, the foods that they eat. I mean, those horrific scenes where slaves are being punished, and it's beyond just whipping, it's just torture. It's horrible things. I mean, how did you research this? Like, where did you find the information that went into creating these characters?
So Phoebe was based on, she's definitely based on Mary Lumpkin to a degree. When I was researching, there was not a lot of information specifically on Mary Lumpkin, but I was able to find information on women like her. So there's a character, Karina Hinton, who actually, I just named her who she is in the story. There was a little bit more information on her also being married to a jailer. And so I went to the Library of Virginia. I'm very fortunate that it's in Richmond, so it wasn't hard to get to. I combed through periodicals. My daughters and I went to visit different plantations in Virginia. I tried to focus primarily on Virginia plantations because I feel like the story is going to be different in Virginia. It's going to be different in South Carolina. It's going to be different in New Orleans, right? And so I had to really keep my focus. And it's very difficult because these stories are all so interesting that you could jump down a rabbit hole and spend hours and hours. And now I'm going in a different direction from the story I wanted to tell. So it's really important for me to try and stay as focused as possible. I read a lot of books by people who were enslaved because their narratives gives a very different perspective than when a historian is telling you what happened. I wanted to get close to the way they felt. And like you said, the smells and the taste and the touch, like I needed to get into their bodies in order to write the story. So there was a book by Charles Ball. He was an enslaved person. I also read The Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacob. That was another one that got me right into the story. So it was a combination of all of that. And then as I'm writing, sometimes I'll get to a scene, particularly, I know one of the things that I had to always go back and research was the way they dressed. So
Mhm.
I'll write the scene and I'm writing, and then I'm like, oh goodness, wait, they probably have more layers on. And so I would have to go, and I have diagrams in my office hanging on the wall of these are the layers of clothing that they would wear, and this is what the plantation looked like. And so I try and world build a bit on the wall. And this was the first time I had to do that, like actually lay out pictures for myself so that as I'm writing, I can kind of look up at it and oh, that's what happened, you know.
Mhm.
So it was a combination of a lot of things that really brought the story together.
You did an amazing job. I mean, for those of you who haven't read Yellow Wife yet, like you will feel yourself in these people's bodies. And that is such a tribute to the way you brought this world to life. And I wanted to ask about Phoebe specifically. So she's caught between worlds in so many ways. I mean, without giving too much away, she's deeply, she grows up like, talk about how she grows up on that first plantation where she's sort of the pet of the master's sister, and she learns to play the piano and she learns to read, which is huge.
Yeah.
So talk about her character.
Yeah, so for me, when I was researching Mary, I didn't know exactly where she came from. And so fiction is what I do, right? So I do try and stay as close to the truth as possible, but I also have to leave room for my imagination to do what it needs to do, and also for the characters to come through me and tell the story that they want to tell. So I placed Phoebe on a plantation in Charles City, Virginia to begin with, and she is the daughter of the master, Master Jacobs, as well with his favorite slave, Ruth. Ruth, Phoebe's mother, is the medicine woman and also the seamstress. She runs the loom house. And so Phoebe is sort of protected because the master's sister, Miss Sally, doesn't have children. She never married. And so she kind of makes a project out of Phoebe. Phoebe is her girl. So she educates her and she teaches her to play piano, and she kind of takes her under her wing. Well, Miss Sally eventually dies, the master's sister, and the master takes a wife. And that's where the troubles begin for Phoebe, because his wife wants no part of Phoebe and her spoiled self, you know. She even says that Phoebe thinks she's better than a slave, but that's the way she was brought up. So she is caught between these two worlds. She's not, you know, of the house, but she's not of the fields. And so she's somewhere in between. She's been promised freedom at her 18th birthday, but a series of events happens, and Phoebe finds herself thrust into this world that she had no knowledge. I mean, she knows that that people outside of the plantation, there are things that happen, but she's not familiar with the things that she is thrust into. She finds herself at the jail. And when she arrives, the owner of the jail, his name is Reuben LaPierre, he takes a liking of Phoebe right away. And that's where her life begins to change. And so she has to find out, she has to discover who she is. She also has to figure out, how can she outwit him? How can she survive? What does she have to do for her and her family? And to me, that's really what the heart of the story is about. The story is about a woman who has to go to any lengths for herself and for her family.
Right. And I mean, it was so amazing, the scene in the jail where they're auctioning the slaves, and the women are stripped, right? They're standing there and they're told to take their clothes off so people can get a better look at what they're buying. And Phoebe refuses. Like
Mm.
I can you remember the line exactly what she says?
Oh gosh, that actually was one of my favorite scenes to write. And I have to say that I read a bit of that in one, not a narrative, but in one of the history books that I read. It was a woman very similar to Phoebe at that point. And I thought, oh wow, that strength, that
Mhm.
resilience, that to me is who Phoebe is.
All right, I found
And
it. I found it. So I'm going to read it.
you
Okay.
found it,
I
okay.
found it. Well, do you want to read it? You should
Oh,
read
you,
it.
you
It's
found it. Wow.
page 86.
Okay.
This is a treat, you guys. This is oh God, I love this book. I hope you guys can sense that through the screen. It's wonderful, and it's an incredible journey, and it's hard going. I mean, it's heart-wrenching, and these people suffer in ways that, I was reading it and thinking, like, would I even survive what's happened to these people? So it's just amazing. All right, you got it? You there?
Yep, I'm there.
Okay.
Okay, so Phoebe is she's on the auction block, and I'm going to back up a little bit to the bottom of 85. What happens is that she's on the auction block, and the person who the auctioneer is telling her what to do. And so the presenter read from his slip, mulatto girl from Charles City named Phoebe. This here is a house negra, excellent at sewing and knows how to work the loom. She is prime age for breeding and would also make a fine fancy girl. He made his tone deep and melodic, like he was describing a prized possession. Disrobe, in order that we might see how form and sound you are. He looked at me. I did not budge. Disrobe now. Wringing my hands, I responded, I will not. The room gasped and murmured while the presenter's cheeks deepened even darker. He looked like a lobster ready to claw my eyes out. Disrobe, wench, or we will have you struck with 100 lashes. Something shifted inside of me. I had never been whipped in my life, but I had been snatched from my home, lost my mom, my truest love, traveled on foot in ropes for days, starved, slept equivalent of a hog's pen with feces up to my ankles. Nothing else scared me. I would not take off my dress in front of these men. I would not follow Matilda into that back room. I would not sink further into degradation than I already had. They would have to kill me first. And I stood with my feet grounded, preparing to put up a good fight. I plead to be exempt from this exposure. My credentials shall suffice. I stared the presenter square in his pig eyes.
I loved that. I loved that so much. And I know we have questions waiting. I just wanted to ask quickly, the fancy girls who Phoebe ends up ministering to in the jail. Talk to me about their role, about, who these women are in this world, because they're not slaves, they're not out in the fields. It's a little bit closer to prostitution. So talk about them.
Yeah, so in my research, I found that a lot of the mulatto women, they were actually sold as fancy girls. And what their role was really was to work at brothels. It was a form of prostitution, and their masters did make money off of them. And so it was another arm of the business for a lot of the masters and the men who were in charge. And so that was something that Phoebe found herself involved in as the story progresses.
Um, and I don't want to give too much more away, but I will tell you that when you read this book, you are going to meet some amazing characters, and you are going to see them, suffer and triumph and just feel so incredibly real. And that, I think, is such a tribute to you and such a strength of this book, that all of these details just combine to make these people feel like they're living and they're breathing. I'm wondering, was there any hesitation in writing about slaves and suffering? I mean, I think that, in all of the conversations that we were having, sparked by the protests this summer, and, all of these like books about anti-racism, there were people saying that, like, there are more stories than just slavery stories, and we should be reading all kinds of stories, which of course I completely agree with. But, talk to me. I mean, was it traumatic for you to write this? And, how did you, I mean, what do I want to ask here?
I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think I got what you're saying. And for me, this is what I tell my children, and this is what I told my children even before the uprising and the social uprising this summer. I always tell them everything in this world goes back to slavery. everything. The foundation in which this country was founded on was on the backs of enslaved people. And so everything that we're feeling, history constantly repeats itself. 2020 was just like 1970, which was just like 1985, which was like 1950. It constantly repeats itself. And so if you understand where we came from as a country, as people, as Americans, then you know where we're going. We know what we need to do. We know that there's some healing that needs to happen. So for me, writing about the foundation of our country, it felt right. It felt like I was chosen by our ancestors to tell their story. It felt like I was giving voice to people who have been marginalized, whose stories have been swept under the carpet, whose stories are not taught in middle school or high school. I mean, even this particular story that I told with Yellow Wife is a Richmond story. People come up to me all the time and say, I live down the street from where the jail was. I never knew that this existed. And
Wow.
so there's always a reason to tell a story, a historical story, whether it's slavery, whether it's civil rights. This is our country. This is the fiber and the fabric in which it has been born on. So there's always another story to be told. I don't think there's ever going to be enough slave stories. I don't think there's ever enough civil rights stories. I don't think there's ever enough, because there's so many people who were instrumental in all of this. Their stories and their voices deserve to be heard. And I feel quite special that I was, the one to be able to tell it.
It's amazing what you've done. And I'm just thinking back to like the way that reading and writing was a forbidden activity. And the fact that Phoebe knows how to read, knows how to write, and eventually teaches her children how to do it. I mean, that makes her special, and that makes her dangerous in this context. And I think like the power of a story is something that comes through, within the book and around the book. And I think, I I I also feel like, you were chosen to tell this story because you did such a great job with it. And I just so encourage everybody to read this if you haven't already. And I know there's lots of questions, so I am going to get to them. Betty wants to know, how did you come up with the name for this book?
Oh, Betty, what a great question. So, Yellow Wife,
Mm.
when I was researching Robert Lumpkin, and I found a portion of his will online, and it said, I leave all of my fortune and my real estate to my yellow wife. And then he had some other things that he left to his Black concubine. And so when he referred to Mary Lumpkin as his yellow wife, I thought, ooh, that's quite interesting. And I just jotted it down. And so it was my working title, was Yellow Wife. And I always feel like if when it gets to the publishing, when we get to publishing, if they want to change it, I don't think it's going to fit, it's not marketable, I'm always very open because I really trust my team. But it didn't happen. They all loved it. And so Yellow Wife stuck.
And I'm going to ask about the cover, which is gorgeous. I mean, is that the first one they showed you? Did you have to like tweak it to get it? Talk to me about how that happened.
Yeah, so the cover, I'm very fortunate too, because all four of my novels, the publishing houses involved me in the cover, which is a really nice thing. I know all authors don't get that chance. But for Yellow Wife, they first asked me, what did I envision? And it wasn't this at all. I thought there's a scene in the book where her mother has on that beautiful red calico dress. And so I was thinking that was what the cover was going to be, either like the red calico dress or something, something like that. And so they were sending different rounds and nothing was just right, but we would pick one and say, maybe if we change this and change that. So this cover was actually on the fourth round of cover drafts. And we
Wow.
got it down to two covers. And if you see the cover, like there's a little bit of texture kind of in her dress. You see this background, that is Richmond that you see. This is kind of like 1900s Richmond. That was something that I had asked for, and they were able to kind of fold it into the dress. I also asked for the key because of her diary in the book. And so they were able to put the key in it. But for the most part, they brought me the design. I gave little tweaks, and then we came to this, and we've done a great job with it.
Yes. Nancy Wilson wants to know, I was wondering if the slaves on the plantations treated each other differently depending on the shade of their skin.
Hmm. That is quite possible. It's not anything that I highlighted in Yellow Wife, primarily because most of the scenes on the plantation happened at the house and around the house. I didn't have a lot of field scenes where you saw them kind of interacting. And when they did interact, like at a wedding or a funeral at church, people, the people in the fields looked up to the people in the house because they brought them food. So they always brought them food when they could. They always made sure that they ate, and they wouldn't eat. So Phoebe and the other women from the house, if they went to a gathering, they wouldn't eat because they would make sure that the people in the fields got the food. So that is possible that it happened, but it wasn't something I highlighted in this particular story.
Nadia Murray wants to know, will you ever do a sequel to Yellow Wife with Phoebe's children?
Hmm. So I'm never going to say never, but I will say that spending 3 years in 1850 was a lot. I know we talked about some of those difficult scenes that I had to write, and I spent all my reading and writing time in that place. So I do need a little bit of separation from that time period for now. So we'll see, but the next book that I'm working on is still historical fiction, but not quite as far back.
Okay. Jennifer Becker asks, for a long time, there were few published novels about US slavery by Black authors. That's changing now. Why do you think that is? Agents and editors were agents and editors prejudiced against non-white authors, and or were Black authors reluctant to write about such a painful subject?
That's interesting. Well, I can't speak for everyone. I can only kind of speak to my experience. I think that I think that it's really what books gets pushed through, like it doesn't, just because you don't have the book in your hand, that doesn't mean that the book wasn't written. I know that particularly when Love in a Carry-On Bag was coming out, one of the reasons why I wasn't able to get a publishing deal is because there was such a turnover in the industry of African-American editors leaving or being forced to leave publishing. And so the pool was smaller to pick from. And so me being a brand new author, they weren't really looking for me because they rather work with a mid-list or, an author that they knew that they could sell books. They didn't want to take the chance on me. And so just because the book is not in the store doesn't mean that the book hasn't been written. Sometimes books are written and people don't have the connections. It's very difficult to get an agent. I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I am in because it's not easy. It's not easy to get an agent. It's not easy to get an audience for the work that you have. And so, sometimes it just takes that extra fortitude. You just really have to push through. There are a lot of books by self-published authors that are amazing, but they just haven't had the audience in order to push them up to traditional publishing. So the books are probably out there. It's just they may not just be as easy for you to find.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess I'm wondering, like, what have you seen change in your career in publishing? Are things getting better? Are there more authors now who are more open to those stories? I mean, I know that Terry McMillan talks about, when she was selling her first books and people were saying, oh, well, Black women don't read, and then she sold Mama and then Disappearing Acts, which was just a huge hit, and then Waiting to Exhale, which was, ginormous, and clearly there's an audience, but it seems that it's cyclical. Like everything in publishing is cyclical. Like, this audience, Black women, Hispanic readers, whatever, they don't read, and then some book will come, it will be a huge hit, all of the editors will say, get me the next one of that, which maybe won't be as huge of a hit because it's not the original thing, and then there's this period of forgetting, and then it's like, oh my God, like there's an audience, get me more. So tell me what you've seen. What has your experience been?
I mean, I agree I think there's a bit of a cycle that happens. I think right now, editors and publishing houses are clamoring for anything by Black women, by Black men. All of the stories though, everything right now, historical or contemporary, is kind of hot right now, right? And it's because of the social uprisings that happened over the summer, and the change of the president, and all the things that we're feeling in America right now. It says, oh, Black Lives Matter, let's go out and get books by Black authors. But it'll like you said, they'll forget, and it'll go right back to where it has been. And so it's definitely a cycle with everything. Like I said, history continues to repeat itself, and that's in publishing and in other places. So right now, maybe I'm hot, I'll take it.
I would take it too. Okay, so Becky wants to know, she says, talk about Monroe. I just loved him and felt he was so caught as an outsider. He was just my favorite after Phoebe.
So Monroe was near and dear to my heart. Writing him it was easy for me to see him. It was easy for me to feel him. Every time he came onto the page, I felt like a little quickening in my heart. So he was a very special character, and figuring out how to maneuver him through the story, with enough danger, but to keep him, safe at the same time, was always something I was kind of towing the line of. So I really did. I enjoyed writing him.
Mm-hmm. A couple of people are asking about film rights. Like, are we going to see Yellow Wife on the big screen or the small screen? What's going on there? Anything to tell us?
So I wish I had something to say right now, but what I will say is just keep that energy going. I'm going to say from your lips to God's ears, okay? Keep that energy going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me see if we have one last question. Oh, yes. Okay. So Betty, again, wants to know about, I think, the sex scenes. She's saying, when you were in the heart of writing the novel and had to write very graphic scenes, or maybe not the sex scenes, I think graphic could be violence as well. Did it ever keep you up at night?
No, because I separate myself from the story. So I tend to write in the mornings, and then in order to get the story out of my body, I usually will go for a run or some sort of exercise, because I have to ground myself afterwards. Because 1850, I'm so deep down in my head, like I'm in that place, that I can't just like get up and like be Sadeqa. Like I need that space to kind of separate me from the story, and kind of come back to myself and ground myself. So I would usually do some sort of exercise or something like that to kind of separate myself. So by the time I go to bed, I'm not, nor if I'm thinking about the story, it's more edits, not necessarily something that hurts my body. It's more like, oh, I should change that, or oh, tomorrow I should fix that, or something like that. That's normally what I'm thinking when I go to bed.
So talk to us a little bit about your process, like what time of day, longhand, laptop, outline, not outline. I mean, we get the pictures on the wall with the clothing, but talk about, I think a lot of people want to know how something goes from being an idea to a book.
So with Yellow Wife, the first thing I did once I realized that it was a story that I wanted to write is that I call my agent. She and I have been, I have two agents. So my developmental agent, she and I have been together since Love in a Carry-On Bag. She was actually my editor first. So whenever I have an idea for a story, I literally talk the whole story out to her over the phone. And so it's almost like a dump session. And from there, she'll say, go write a synopsis. So I'll go and write the synopsis. We'll go over that a little bit. From the synopsis, and for those who don't know, a synopsis basically is a big summary of the story. It could be 3 pages, it could be 15 pages, but it's basically the full gamut of what I want to tell with this story. From the synopsis, I then kind of on my own do a little bit of a chapter outline, but I leave space for the story to tell itself. So I am a bit of a plotter when I write, but I also don't, it's just a roadmap. Like my outline and my synopsis is just a roadmap, so that if I get lost in the dark, I can say, okay, what? I could go back and look at something and kind of get me back on track. But I leave a lot of space for the fiction to come in, for the characters to speak to me, but I do need somewhat of a roadmap. So I kind of outlined it in 3 parts, part 1, part 2, and part 3, and then kind of fill it in as I go. It's like I didn't color it in. And so then I sit down and then I start writing. But one of the things that I do is after I write the first draft, which is usually a hot mess, it really is just me trying to get the story down on page, just something. I just need to do something. I need to have something to edit and work with. Then I print it, I read it, I make notes in the margin, and then I retype the whole thing over again.
Wow.
I knew you were going to make that face.
Wow. Wow. Because I'm listening and I'm like, yeah, okay, outline. Because I'm about the same way you are. Like I outline, but then, you know, like you said, it's a roadmap. And maybe one day I want to take a little road trip this way or see what's going down there on that street. But like typing the whole thing over, I have not ever done. And that is a tremendous endeavor. And I can imagine it would be really helpful. I mean, you know, a lot of work, but also really helpful.
I'll tell you why it's helpful, because what happens when I retype it, and I do it, I did it more in the earlier books. Now I'm down to maybe like 2 retypes, but what you love in a carry-on bag, I retyped it like 6 times. But the reason why I retype is because one of my first writing teachers said that when you retype the story, it's like it goes through your body again. As it goes through your body, you are feeling the story, and you're gonna let go some of those things that you don't need because you don't feel like typing it. So it tightens up the story a bit because it just weeds out that stuff that doesn't need to be there, and it opens up your imagination to flutter in the stuff that does. And so that's why in the earlier drafts I retype.
Wow. Okay. I'm in awe. I bow down to your achievement. That is amazing. So the last question is from Justine, and Justine wants to know how much of you and your spunkiness and your spirit is in Phoebe?
Oh, well, hi, Tina. Tina's my cousin.
All right. So she knows. She knows.
Yes. How much? Okay. Well, you heard the scene that I just read from the book that we picked out. So she does have a lot of spunk. I try to create. See, with my characters, I always write about women. I love writing about strong women. I love writing about women who have to go through some things that are so hard. But when they get to the other side, they are like lioness. You know, they have gone through the fire and they have lived to tell the story. Because I feel like that's who I am, you know? Going from, you know, being a girl growing up in Philadelphia to moving to New York City to wanting to be an actress, thinking I'm only going to be in school for 2 weeks, you know, to, you know, having to self-publish my book, even though I thought I was connected. I mean, that was the biggest thing. Having worked in publishing, I said, well, I'm connected. Getting a book deal is going to be like 1, 2, 3, you know, and it didn't work out, but I didn't quit. I had to go and pound the pavement and sell books in 98 degrees, you know, outside in the hot sun. So that really is the women that I like to write about because, you know, it's an inspiration. It lets other people know that they can do it. But it's also, you know, the women who we admire, the ones who we look up to, like Kamala Harris, you know, how many times has she been told no and doors have been slapped into her face, and now she is the vice president of the United States, you know, first woman, first African-American woman, first, you know, South Asian woman, you know, like, so those are the women who I look up to and I aspire to be like. I want my daughters to be like. And so those are the women who I try to write. So maybe she has a little bit of me in her.
Well, this was a fantastic conversation. I hope all of you enjoyed this little glimpse behind the scenes of how a book happens, how a career happens, how historical fiction happens. And for those of you who have not read Yellow Wife, I sincerely hope that you are going to run, not walk, and get your copy, because I think that this book will move you and change you and open your eyes to a piece of history that, like you said, like maybe we are still not learning enough about. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I know that there's a link to buy the book. I believe it's in the chat. I hope it's in the chat. Thank you all for being here. And Sadeqa, best of luck on the rest of the tour. And we're all going to keep that good energy going so we can so this can be like Bridgerton.
keep going. And Jennifer, I want to thank you so much. It means so much that, you know, a #1 New York Times bestselling author is taking the time to reach back for me. So I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank
It's
you.
my pleasure. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful night. Happy reading.